People who give job interviews, what are some subtle red flags that say, this person won't be a good hire? When asked about their experiences with a topic, they stick to reciting textbook definitions of terminology rather than demonstrating any understanding of how to apply it. I had one person who was literally forwarding our questions into ChatGPT and then reciting rambling answers that provided definitions of keywords in our questions rather than actually answering the question. Like, we'd ask, what's something a previous employer or educator has recognized you for? And then they'd answer examples of things that an employer might recognize an employee are for. Like, okay, damn, I thought I was a nervous wreck in interviews, but I'd never do that. Story 2. My favorite story of red flags is when I screened resumes for a restaurant. A couple walked in dirty, disheveled, and reeking of grass. This is long before it was legal. And asked for applications. They were paper then. They popped in at the bar to fill them out, and the woman goes, babe, what's my zip code? I'm so spiked right now. Then about 5 minutes later, as they're handing the applications to me, the guy goes, hey, are we getting interviewed now? I got kids in the car. The woman interrupted, they're fine, they're in car seats. I was horrified. It was January. Ran the papers up to the owner in her office, repeated both comments. She looked outside, jots down the plate number, and calls the local cops. When the cops get there, the two of them were trying to get free beers from the bar manager. I'm not sure what happened from there. When it clocked out, the cops had them outside and CPS was involved. So, yeah, don't come to apply for a job or have an interview spiked, smelling, and begging for booze while your toddlers wait in the car in the cold. Story 3. I work in politics and hire a lot of entry-level positions. With some firms, the only qualification is a pulse. In the screening call we pre-interview, I ask them about an issue that they care about. This is to first take out anyone that doesn't have a clue what is going on and also to take out someone on the other side of the aisle. It is very much a partisan position. One person last year slipped up and somehow passed a screening call. In our office, there were cardboard cutouts of 3 prominent political figures, 2 presidents and a VP, all household names at this point. He got to the office, saw the cardboard cutouts, and asked who they were. Story 4. Due to the nature of roles I interview for, I often get people with PhDs and they split into 2 categories. I've done my homework and I'm ready to answer any question. Good. And I'm better than this job and you will give it to me, but I'll join the charade. Bad, like really freaking bad. Also, top tip, if you apply for an information specialist role, don't fudge your own information. We will do due diligence and we will understand whether you are trying to big yourself up, regardless of your background or nationality. Story 5. I'm a mechanical engineer and I have to interview candidates from time to time. In general, I give them a really simple technical question that I would expect a high schooler to solve. It's literally going to be things like calculated the force on this object. The more you deviate away from force equals mass times acceleration, the more I know you are going to be a bad hire. Not only does it show a fundamental misunderstanding of the material at hand, it also shows me that when you don't know the answer, you're prone to taking up meeting time endlessly pointing out true but impossible to solve problems. Story 6. It's a really, really bad idea to be combative with the interviewer. I'm legit trying to help you succeed and I make a considered effort to make you feel at ease. If a question or request doesn't make sense to you, that's fine, let's talk about it. If you answer defensively, bordering on aggression, it's really not going to go well. And you may get the answer right, but the question I'm asking myself is, if I want to deal with you every day, especially considering this was likely your best behavior. Story 7. Had 2 interviews for a software dev position this year that stood out. First one, the guy was well into the interview and going through the coding portion when the door opened behind him. A woman stepped in and asked something about reports and to wrap up what he was doing. When she left, he turned back to the screen and said he was sorry, but he had to go and ended the call. Second was a guy who was doing all right, but halfway through the interview, he just stopped responding to us. Call wasn't frozen, he just stopped talking and responding. Then the call just ended and we never heard anything from him again, even after reaching out to see if he had connection issues and wanted to reschedule. Story 8. I'd say not being aware of who you're applying to is a big red flag. I once worked for a local retailer in Maine, and at the time they did group interviews for potential employees. This was likely to see how well we'd be able to speak to customers and build team camaraderie. We had just gone to the Q&A part of the interview where everyone was asked the most lowball question of, what do you love about the outdoors? Well, this one older lady very loudly and proudly informed the room that she does not like going outside. She said it was like full of animals and bugs, always got her shoes dirty, and she has everything she loves inside her house. We were applying for LL Bean, whose motto is literally be an outsider, so safe to say she didn't get hired. Story 9. Most of these answers aren't subtle at all. An example of a subtle red flag in an interview. is someone who can only provide examples of how they help the group achieve goals. If you give them lots of opportunity to talk about how they overcame challenges, dealt with unexpected results, had to adjust timelines, etc., and they can only give examples of how we solved the problem, I found that to be a red flag. You may initially think, this person seems to be a real team player and collaborates on everything. But my anecdotal experience with this type of employee is that they, more often than not, tend to be freeloaders who skate by just being in close proximity to the action but not doing much themselves. As soon as you give them direct responsibility for any initiative, actually, they don't know what to do or they try to pawn it off on those around them under the guise of being collaborative. So, my advice during an interview, make sure you explain exactly how you specifically took action to solve the issue. I don't care about the end state of your project, I care more about the logic, drive, and responsibility you demonstrated in getting there. Right, so you definitely want someone who says we, but can also speak to their individual contributions. Story 10. I was in management for a daycare and it became pretty easy to identify the red flags. Unfortunately, we were always so hurt for employees that we'd hire them anyway. I know it's kind of a meme, but if you immediately let me know your orientation, I know it's going to be bad. Like, I had several candidates essentially open up with how they were gay, their race, and why their life was tough, which I get. We are in the South, it sucks, but like, how do you feel about changing diapers? And we'd hire them anyway, and they'd immediately get into it with a parent. Story 11. I've done a few interviews. While not exactly subtle, you'll get passed over if you don't have an answer for a standard interview question. My workplace, like many large firms, interviews with prepared questions and scoring templates in an effort to remove bias. And if you don't have an answer, you get the minimum score for that section, which will often put you behind anyone that didn't bomb the interview. Folks, always having an example of how you dealt with workplace conflict, a problem you found and solved, in a project or task you saw through to completion with how you overcame some challenges. That's some basic stuff right there. Also, we had a standard question about the importance of DEI at the start of the interview, and everyone said, I don't see color, through the panel right off. I understand that it can be said in good faith, but it's often a cover phrase for folks that don't really believe in the importance of diversity in the workplace by dismissing the benefits. Story 12. They are wearing pajamas. I had to hire entry-level staff to work for an airline, everything from checking people into pushing wheelchairs and throwing luggage around. Over the course of 2 weeks of hiring, I had 3 different people show up for interviews wearing their pajamas. One of them had a robe, a do-rag, and a stuffed animal and kept sucking on a pacifier. Needless to say, I didn't hire any of them, but to this day, I still don't get why they bothered to set up the appointment, take the time and effort to get there, get through security, etc., but didn't think it was important to put on actual clothing. Story 13. I once interviewed a young woman who seemed perfectly fine, a little quirky perhaps, but we all have our eccentricities. She could have had benefited from more experience in the field, but I thought she might do well if we started her in a lower position and she worked her way up. Another manager was giving her a tour of the facility when I received a text from my supervisor asking me to come out to the parking lot. He was standing behind the applicant's car and gave me a quiet, urgent whisper, "Get over here, quick!" As I approached, I saw the largest bumper sticker on her car, which contained an extremely vulgar phrase. My supervisor turned to me, looked me directly in the eye, and emphatically stated, "You are not hiring her." He then walked away. Needless to say, given that our facility frequently had children present, we did not offer her the position. I found the situation somewhat amusing, though perhaps not something one should publicly advertise. The true irony was that my supervisor himself had a reputation for promiscuity. He was frequently on dating apps and often had romantic interests visit the facility. I suppose he simply had different preferences? Story 14. Main and most common red flags are: they treat employees not related to their interview badly, i.e. being rude to reception, admin, or HR staff who do checks or emails to confirm interviews. So many people will be rude to them and then act surprised when I phone them and tell them they have been rejected. Only once did I let someone interview after being rude to admin, and that was mainly because it was just so strange. They turned up at the office with their parents in tow because they didn't like the date we offered for the interview and insisted we reschedule. After the first 3 interview questions, I had to end it and call a mental health crisis team because it was clear they were in the midst of a full-blown psychosis. They don't research the company they are applying to. So many people think they can sweet-talk their way through a full interview without knowing anything at all about the company. The red flag here, though, isn't that they don't know anything, it's that they make things up. They try to tell you what they know and give it very, very wrong. Even just admitting you don't know is better than getting caught. You can sort of escape by and show an interest in wanting to learn more about the company and be honest about the little you do know. They avoid giving negatives about themselves completely, even when I specifically narrow them down to the point and ask them to reflect on a weakness directly. They pick a positive trait and try to downplay it like a weakness. My experience interviewing hundreds of people tells me that this is just a variation of lying, and they are usually hiding some big flaws. No one is perfect. I specifically pick out people with weaknesses that we can manage and help them work on. For example, I hired someone who said they played off being a perfectionist as a negative, and boy, were they right. The person couldn't keep up with the workload and eventually quit, but the other person I hired, who said they had depression and had periods where they struggled with work life balance, was a great fit after giving them flexibility on hours. They were so grateful and happy to be part of a supportive employer, they worked twice as hard as anyone else. Overall, I found that people who are confident at interviews and those who generally score really well are what I call a 50-50 hire. Often they are first to leave and take better offers at a competitor, or have serious baggage and are often much harder to read as they can talk themselves through an interview easily and hide their flaws or problems, which always comes out eventually. I feel most comfortable and confident hiring people who are not perfect but still have a willingness to develop and improve themselves. Usually, people in this range are very good at their jobs and just get nervous or struggle giving themselves praise to strangers. In the end, the only real way to know is to test them out and see how they get on during probation. The main thing I'd say is make sure you know what kind of person you're looking for, and that will guide your decision during interviews. Do you want someone who can hit the ground running and really competent and skilled but may not last very long? Or someone who you will likely see much more value out of in the long term but with a bit of development? Story 15. Anyone that leads with how important it is that his or her boundaries need to be respected is for sure going to be a pain in the bum to employ. Unless you're some rock star in your field, you should go into any interview with the assumption that there are 10 other people willing to work harder and for less. If you're comfortable enough walking away from the job, then you can hold out and demand more. But if you need the job, know that to distinguish yourself, the employer wants to see someone who is going to help him or her succeed. Story 16. Called someone up for a phone screening. I was asking her generally easy technical questions to see if she qualified to go through our interview process. She was whispering all of her answers and I could barely hear her, and I asked her to speak up. And she said she can't because she's in a meeting at work. That's when I realized the voice I kept hearing in the background wasn't a TV, but a person speaking, giving a speech or something. I told her to try to reschedule with us. We ended up not having her in for an interview. Story 17. Intensely bitter about his divorce, brought up his witch ex-wife a dozen times, and his restraining order. It wasn't like she had any relationship with us, he was just angry venting. But a person who can't control their emotions in an interview is sure to be a problematic employee. A different one let me know it was okay if he stole from us down the road because we, quote, have insurance for that. Yeah, no, lol. Arriving at the interview while spiked isn't a good look either. Story 18. Ignoring advice and hints. In tech, it's pretty common for there to be a dialogue between interviewer and interviewee when doing a difficult problem on the whiteboard. Some problems are actually designed so you don't have enough info without asking questions. It's okay to struggle a little and need some guidance, but ignoring that guidance is pretty much an instant no hire, even if your solution ends up being pretty close in the end. Why? Because we're not just testing your coding skills, we're testing your communication and how you work with teammates. If we hire you the next time we work on a problem together, it might be one where neither of us just knows the answer. And in that situation, you need to be able to collaborate instead of just charging past to work on your own idea. Story 19. I'm not anyone who makes hiring decisions, but I'm often invited to interviews to give feedback on candidates. Something that almost always kills the offer letter is negativity. We just had a fantastic candidate, but she found a way to complain about everything. The state she was from, too boring. The state we are in that she just moved to, too cold. Past jobs, too mundane, bad leadership, etc. Even some of her family members received jabs, currently living with a sister who was too messy. She said everything with a smile on her face and was generally pleasant, but we couldn't get past the fact that she had something negative to say about everything. Doesn't really scream team player or good fit. Story 20. I have a pair of questions that I usually ask in an interview. You worked with a team of other employees at your last job. How did you work together with them, and what were your processes for collaborating and interacting when needed? Followed by, it's common for teams to have a few members who are hard to work with. Tell me about how you've handled that with your previous teams. You'll be shocked at the number of people who will start absolutely crapping on their former coworkers when these questions come up. You'll notice that with both of those questions, I wasn't asking about the former coworkers. I was asking the applicant about their own behavior and actions, and yet, given the opening, I've seen applicants just absolutely roast their former teammates time after time. It's a red flag, often indicating that the applicant will be adversarial if they're hired and placed onto one of our teams. Story 21. Forgetting what position you're interviewing for. I was screening candidates for a teaching position that had opened up at our elementary school. When asked what had interested her in applying, the candidate said she was trying to get out of teaching because kids are so rude and difficult to manage these days. I had to remind her that not only had she applied for a teaching position, it was at a school that specialized in supporting students with complex behavioral disorders. I guess she just really took interviewing for a new challenge to heart. Story 22. I think sometimes the most subtle red flag is gut feel, usually based on body language. I interviewed someone for a senior role a while back and they answered everything fairly well, but when asked about a question in a previous role, they had slightly deranged but subtle eye twitch, like they were triggered and wanted to say something negative but couldn't. I thought it was interesting at the time, but being under pressure to fill the role, I ignored it. Worst hire I'd ever made by far. Alienated their team, went to war with everyone, constant arguments. I trust my gut nowadays. Story 23. If they can't actually answer the questions, and I don't mean I'm not sure, let me think about it. I mean they give some rambling response that never actually answers the question. If they seem to have strong opinions about things that shouldn't be that big of a deal, they usually make bad coworkers. If they allude in any of their answers to anger issues, I hire a lot of entry-level workers and you'd be surprised by how many of them, when asked to tell me about a time there was a conflict at work, what they will admit to. If they can't use basic technology for the interview process, we are a tech, software, CRM heavy company. If they can't own mistakes, when I ask about times there have been problems at work and they skate around their involvement instead of owning it, what I do look for, good work ethic, humility, emotional intelligence, and ability to take constructive feedback. Story 24. Years ago, I was doing a rehire. The guy stated he had left the company to take care of his dad who had terminal cancer. He was gone about 18 months. He refused to fill out an application and background check paperwork. He told me he didn't have to contest, just use his previous paperwork. This was for an aircraft mechanic position, so once you're gone for over 30 days, you have to reapply and get a fresh background check, substance screen, etc. He went to my boss, who he was friends with previously, and my boss said start the rehire process and he'd take care of HR. So I got him started. Background check came back. He was in jail for that period of time and his father had passed away years ago. Needless to say, he did not finish the rehire process. Story 25. I work with animals for a living. I'm not the supervisor who is going to write you up for mistakes, but I do want you to be honest with me about mistakes because we're dealing with living creatures. So I asked what's a mistake you made and how did you rectify it? Question. Some people think it's a bad/unfair question, but I like it. I've had people tell me they'd never made a mistake at work, not really a subtle red flag. And then some people just say they never did it again for the rectify part. So you didn't tell anyone or do anything about it? And if any of these stories are getting to you, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 26. Some recent red flags. Extreme job hopping. I'm talking about 6 jobs in less than 4 years and all of them lateral or worse. His resume was not even up to date because he had quit his last job 2 months ago. He had a job. He'd been working there for 2 months and he was interviewing with us. Cover letter said he had 22 years of experience in our field. Cool, we like experience. He was 26. Used someone else's cover letter. Amazingly, one of my fellow managers decided to hire him anyway. It turned out he lied about all of his experience. Asked them when they could start if offered the position. They said today. They were employed. Yeah, if you quit without notice of your current employer, you will do the same to me. We did an offer. Dude had a big fancy watch that didn't work. At some point in the interview, I realized the second hand was not moving. Then I noticed the time was wrong. I became obsessed with his watch and after 5 minutes confirmed that it wasn't moving at all. It described him perfectly. All flash, no substance. I'm going to add one more that could have been a red flag, but the person handled it brilliantly. A fellow manager asked about a gap in his resume. He said, I was doing landscaping. That's when I decided I didn't want to do landscaping anymore. Everyone in the room nodded. He got hired. Story 27. I've done a lot of hiring for roles that require an employee to be both personable with customers and also be able to work cohesively in a team setting. A question I like to ask people is, what is something most people don't realize or notice about you that you wish they would? You'll get a ton of answers and it's always very interesting to see what people come up with. It makes people think critically about themselves and specifically makes them think critically about why they are good. In an interview setting, I've got a lot of the information I need in front of me in the form of a resume. So tell me, what isn't on here that you want me to know about? It's like someone's opportunity to humble brag, so to speak. I've got some great answers. One person told me, I've tried a lot of really difficult things. Okay, cool. You are comfortable being out of your comfort zone. That is good. I've also gotten an answer like, I'm not a fast learner, but I'm really good at being persistent, and my persistence pays off. So while it takes a little longer, I always become an expert eventually. Another great answer. Now, the red flag here is when someone just can't think of anything. They go blank, and that tells me they lack the ability to self reflect and think critically about themselves. It tells me they're going to be difficult to manage. Story 28. Had an interviewee show up 15 minutes late. He opened the door and stood there for like 2 minutes. I just kind of sat there, wondering what was happening, and then an older woman walked in. He closed the door, and I got up to greet him. He introduced himself and then proceeded to introduce the older lady as his mom. Okay. Before I could even proceed with anything, he immediately asked if his mom could accompany him to the office since they were very close, and also if he could have Wednesdays and Thursdays off as it was D&D days with the boys. I didn't even offer to continue with the interview. I simply showed them both the doors. Story 29. If you're interviewing via Zoom, be mindful of your background. I had a candidate come on and behind them was a cork board full of pictures, news clippings, and drawings. Some of them were thumbtacked in the middle of the pic, etc., and then connected to each other with a red string. It legitimately looked like the kind of cork board you see in TV shows in the home of a serial criminal. I screen capped it and sent it to one of my managers who often sees things differently than me, and I asked them what they thought. The immediate Slack response was, I don't know who that is, but I'm sure the cops are looking for them. The guy had skills, but the vibe was 100% serial criminal in waiting. Story 30. Being argumentative in an interview. If you get past the recruiter screen, you will be talking to people that know the requirements of your job very well. If you decide to argue with the person that is interviewing you, it's going to go poorly, including me stopping the interview with, okay, that about wraps it up. Thank you for coming. I won't ask you if you have any questions or promise any follow-up, and if you ask, I'm going to be honest and state right there, we're not going to consider you at all. I have had this happen on multiple occasions. Don't argue with the interviewer. It cannot go well. Story 31. I was the warehouse manager for the graveyard shift, and we had 5 questions. The last one was, how do you handle conflict? This guy looked at me and said if anyone offended him or disrespected him, he wouldn't hesitate to knock them on the... I said, right, as you should, and thanked him for his time. As he was leaving, he asked when he would start. I let him know we would be reaching out soon to let him know. Everyone who answered those questions like a normal person was immediately hired. Needless to say, we did not reach out to him. Story 32. Inability to reason through a problem. Every answer is, I'll ask my manager. This seems to be a cultural thing with some people. Overly negative talk, unable to provide good examples of experience when asked. Being so nervous it impairs ability to answer questions. Overuse of jargon and corporate speak tends to be covering up a lack of actual answer. Clearly looking things up while doing a Zoom interview. Making up nonsense answers instead of saying, I don't know. Listing every technology known to man in your resume but actually having no experience in 90% of them. Inability to make any sort of small talk or clear lack of social skills. Unnatural speaking, trying hard to follow a script like you memorized a how to do an interview video or something. No understanding or knowledge of the company or what we do, clearly did no research at all prior to interview. Never stayed at a job more than a few months. Story 33. I interviewed a lot of people for positions in video game studios. These are the traits I try to spot and avoid. Huge ego, very common in creative industries, usually easy to spot. Kinda dude who took part in game jams and compares his process to Kubrick's. People who try to say whatever you want to hear. If we're going to work together, we need to be relatively transparent. Reluctance to admit errors, we all make them. People who BS to appear flawless are toxic. Main character kind of people, great teams are made of people who put the team first. People who apply to one job but are clearly eyeing the promotions. People like this are rarely subtle. I like to let them feel like the interview is going great. This helps them reveal more of themselves. Story 34. I interview for big tech. These subtle clues are things like resume is way too long, zillions of technologies on there. Usually this person doesn't pass a tech part of the interview. I don't discriminate based on this, but if someone shows up in a full-on suit and tie, it's likely they won't work out. People who please their managers or stakeholders at all costs. Sometimes I ask something to the effect of, tell me about a time when you realized you couldn't deliver a commitment and how you managed it. And if their answer was, we worked 1 billion hours, had no weekends for months, but did it anyway, I always deliver, that's basically disqualifying in my mind. What I hear here is that the project management is bad, they never push back, The thing that shipped is likely broken and tested poorly, and they didn't face the pain that makes you learn from this and do things differently, so it'll probably happen again. Story 35. I interview between 10 and 100 people a year depending on how things are going and particular roles in my past. I work for a fairly large company surrounding insurance, data, and reporting mostly. Honestly, the goal is for everyone to answer things the same exact way about 90% of the time. With people who do multiple interviews, it's pretty easy to tell who is using AI to answer and who is legitimate. So just be yourself. The red flag in this area is not clarifying the question and prattling on potentially in the wrong direction. Depending on the role, I purposely put ambiguous questions because I need a person to question others before committing. Or I may ask a question knowing it's kind of impossible to answer without spending time clarifying the request. I do this very intentionally, and it's make or break for a lot of folks. What matters most to me in any interview is how you respond to, do you have any questions for us? That really defines who you are and can stand out more than anything else. It's the last question and leaves the final impression, and it can be very telling about what matters to you. I will always tell you next steps and time expectations. Do not ask about salary and benefits. Frankly, that's a bit outside of my control, TBH. Ask thought-provoking questions. For example, let's say you hired me today. What are the biggest hurdles I would need to overcome to be successful over the next year? Now, this accomplishes a few things. One, you are already putting it in the interviewer's head that they hired you. Two, it exposes what the interviewer's concerns about you are, and you can address this in your thank you letter or email you send out to the people who interviewed you. Yes, this is a requirement for me too. It's not always the actual interview that makes the decision. You may want to additionally ask about the team and company culture, as well as ask if you are backfilling an existing role or if they are growing and adding to the role. Lastly, I don't want to be stuck in the mud, but it's worth noting it's not always about you and your skills and background. Cultural fit is equally important. The best skilled employee can still tank an entire team if they disrupt the flow of things. So at times, you could be the most amazing person for the role, but due to the makeup of the team, it just might not be the best fit at the time. Story 36. I once went to a job interview that was held in the break room. The entire place reeked of refrigerant. When I asked about it, they casually explained that one of the staff members had punctured the fridge a few weeks prior while trying to clear ice, but they had it taped up so it was still quote-unquote usable. People, including my interviewer, were still using that fridge for their lunch. The interview was quite long with a 20-minute break halfway through. I didn't go back in after the break. Instead, I went home and felt terrible for the next day or so. Refrigerant exposure is serious, and it was clear these individuals didn't seem to care about the hazards. When they opened the fridge, the waft of chemicals nearly knocked me over. Story 37. I don't have much to add about my own interview and hiring practices as they've largely been covered, but I wanted to share my mom's unique approach. My mom is incredibly strong, a story for another time. She lives with MS and her particular symptoms aren't immediately obvious, mostly affecting her cognitive functions and balance. She had to stop walking upstairs almost immediately after her diagnosis, which becomes relevant later. As the director of the largest department at her company, she didn't participate in many hiring panels, but she did interview for upper management positions. Before each interview, she would meet the interviewee in the lobby, introduce herself by name but not title, and give them a tour of the building. When it was time to go upstairs, she would take them in the elevator. She often faced criticism from candidates for not taking the stairs with comments like, "It's healthier," or "to lose weight." This was an automatic disqualification for obvious reasons. When she would walk the interviewee into the interview room, she always took her position at the head of the table and then reintroduced herself as the director. She said that every time it happened, she could see the interviewee deflate. Their interviews often went downhill very quickly once they realized they had just insulted their potential future boss. Sometimes people truly reveal their true character in the most mundane moments. Story 38. I tend to be quite lenient in interviews, aiming to make candidates feel as comfortable as possible, as I believe everyone is human. For instance, I once interviewed a woman via Zoom whose parrot began shrieking because it had been put in a cage for the interview. I simply told her to take the parrot out and it sat on her head for the rest of the interview. Aside from that, she was a perfectly reasonable candidate. However, an automatic red flag for me is someone who cannot follow simple instructions or makes questionable decisions even before the interview begins. One woman had to self-record a video questionnaire which started recording the moment she hit start. She pressed start, then proceeded to check her appearance on screen, touch up her makeup, and clean the room around her to make it look presentable on camera before finally attempting to start the questionnaire, by which point she timed out. It made me wonder if she had read the clear instruction that recording starts when you press start. Another example is anyone who takes a Zoom interview in a public place, like a loud coffee shop. I can barely hear them, and it makes me question their judgment for thinking such an environment is appropriate for a professional interview. These two examples immediately come to mind. Story 39. When I'm interviewing for senior developer positions, I don't usually waste time on code writing skills. I can see in your resume those sorts of things anyway. Sure, people can fake it, but at 15 years experience, it's a lot harder to do. So what I like to do is just hold a conversation and ask them about their last project. Start with what they did, then ask how that workflow impacted their customer. If all that person could do is tell me the very specific thing they worked on, I'll usually pass. At the senior level, I need folks that are curious and able to connect their work with other areas of the business. I can hire a junior to just write code or solve small business requirements. Story 40. A candidate once survived for an interview I was conducting 20 minutes late. At that point, I wasn't particularly keen on proceeding, but I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, so I decided to go ahead anyway. She was wearing pajamas, had makeup that looked days old, and a very prominent hickey on the front of her neck. At one point, while making conversation, I asked her about her music preferences. She then pulled out her phone and played a 6-minute dubstep song that she described as two pirates in love in song form. I sat there in silence for the entire song, trying my best not to laugh. She was nice, but I didn't offer her the job. A few days later, I ran into her at Taco Bell, and she informed me she had been offered an assistant manager position there, which made me chuckle. Story 41. Years ago, a guy interviewed for an administrative position at a software training company that did projects mainly for the government. There were a lot of top brass in suits and the minions in khaki pants type of place, like The Office. This dude checked off all the boxes and was hired. The dude then sent a singing telegram dressed in a chicken suit to do a song and dance, thanking the primary manager for the job. The old man CEO was there that day and just sat there and angry while the chicken danced and sang. It was incredibly awkward and out of place, like The Office. The guy's offer was pulled. Story 42. Don't talk about money until I make you an offer. Then I would respect your negotiation efforts. Don't talk about work-life balance. I know, and you know, we work for money. We have no love for the company has no love for us. You should be trying to do the least work for the most money, and the company should be trying to get the most work out of you for the least pay. But show me you know how to play the game. Show me you have an understanding of how to get along with people even if your ultimate goal is to serve your own agenda. It's not fair and it's not right and blah 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 blah, but it is reality. Maintain the illusion of civility and cooperation. Story 43. I hire a lot of high school and early college individuals, but I take the interview and screen process pretty seriously. Some things I look for that will remove people from the hiring process. 1. A prank voicemail is the fastest way for me to never call a person again. One of those, hello? Hello? I can't hear you. Yeah, you could be amazing, but you're out. 2. Mentioning your previous job/coworkers in a negative light. Even if it's true, I'm only hearing one side of the story, so I'm weary of how you're needlessly twisting a past experience for sympathy. It's basically never relevant, so avoid doing it. 3. I had a kid repeatedly say that situations tested their patience. Led me to believe that they are typically a hothead and won't be able to handle difficult situations that may come up with any maturity. 4. I asked a lot of tell me about a time type questions where I'm asking for them to pull from a past experience of theirs to demonstrate a skill they would need at work. Could be past work, school, social circles, family, I don't care, just need them to demonstrate the soft skill. If I press for even a little bit of detail and you can't remember even the most basic details, then I believe you're lying. 5. Lack of energy when you first pick up the phone can be off-putting, but I try not to hold it against them. There's lots of reasons a high school kid would be low energy, but that, coupled with a rocky interview, would make me on edge for whether or not they'll be a good staff. 6. I am pretty specific on what I need them to bring with them to the interview. If they don't do that, similar to 5, it's not a disqualifier, but an average interview would make me unlikely to hire them. 7. If another person not being interviewed shows up with you, mom, dad, best friend, it's weird to me. It's not necessarily a disqualifier, but it can show a lack of confidence and a need for support. Story 44. I'll be honest, once the knowledge has been confirmed in the interview, it's 100% a vibe check. Like, do I actually want to talk to and work with this person every day? Many people don't pass that part, but we've also hired people before the interview was even over. We have a chat open, and in the first 10 minutes, the whole team is saying, we don't really need to ask any more questions, but we do to find the interview out. We just recently hired a product owner, and we only interviewed one person. We all knew before the interview was even over. Story 45. A subtle one I've noticed a couple of times, but when you ask them where they want to be in 3 years, 5 years, etc., and they answer with running my own business, be my own boss, or something vague along those lines, the fact that they don't even have something they're passionate about that they want to turn into a business, and they basically just don't want someone telling them what to do just screams laziness and bad attitude. Maybe I just got a couple of bad examples of it, but I saw half a dozen who said it in their interview, and all of them had a crappy attitude, even working for a really lax manager. Story 46. I had just bought a small local restaurant and was in the process of hiring employees to replace the old owners who were also the cooks. I had one guy come in and hand me his application. He was friendly, had a good handshake, seemed clean, which some of my applicants weren't. Wasn't a high school kid, but still early 20s, which I wanted since high schoolers are so new to the idea of work that sometimes it doesn't work out. I looked the application over, not intending to do an interview right away, but just making quick small talk with him. I noticed he graduated from the high school my wife taught at years earlier before she and I started dating. I asked him if he knew her. She went by her ex-husband's last name at that time, and he told me, "Oh, that old woman? Yeah, I hated her." Then he proceeds to rant about how much she sucked the life out of his high school existence, so I had to stop him. "She's my wife." "Oh, yeah, she wasn't bad all the time, though." I tossed his application in the trash. That night, I got home and asked my wife if she knew whatever his full name was. I've forgotten now. And she immediately tears into her own rant before I can even tell her that he applied for a job with us. "Do not hire that kid," were her first words. So the hate was mutual, it seems. Story 47. So, back when I used to interview people, the company had a pre-written interview packet. Most of the questions were the usual softball stuff, but there was one I always paid attention to. The gist of the question was to tell me about a time when you owned up to a mistake, even when it was hard to do so. Now, the best answers to this question were instances in which the interviewee messed something up and admitted it, even if they could have gotten away with it. I didn't get a lot of those. Mostly, guys have answers where they messed up and admitted to it, but their screw-up was so obvious they would have been found out anyway. One guy crashed his boss's truck after he was asked to park it. The worst ones, though, were the ones who couldn't even come up with anything. They couldn't think of, or admit to, a single instance in which they had made a mistake. This is a huge red flag. Anyone who can't think of a time when they stepped on their own thing is either delusional or disingenuous, and I've got no time for either. And if any of these stories got to you and you learned a thing or two from them, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.